Hola, buen dia. It's me, Peppermint. And when I'm not on RuPaul's Drag Race or simply being New York City's sweetest diva, I'm tuned into the fabulously empowering Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice Power Hour, coming to you every weeknight at 7 p.m. live from our good old friends at the BRCSJ Virtual HQ via their Facebook page. Tune in tonight.
Need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers.
Social justice, power hour, power hour, power hour. Social justice, power hour, power hour, power hour.
Good evening to our friends on the East Coast. Good afternoon to our friends in the West, and good in-between time to our friends in those in-between spaces. Welcome, 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 my friends. Welcome to the Social Justice Power Hour. Welcome to the virtual headquarters of the Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice. My name is Robert Martin Seda Schreiber. I'm the chief activist here at the center, and your host for this evening, as I have been for the past year and 8 months. We've been doing the do. We've been doing the Power Hour every single freaking weeknight since the pandemic started. Over 450 some odd shows, many of them very odd indeed. And we're thrilled that you're joining us tonight in virtual communion, and you're in for a good one. Gosh, I'm excited about this. This book, Read Until You Understand, The Profound Wisdom of Black Life and Literature by Farah Jasmine Griffin, our guest tonight. It's a beautiful book. She's a beautiful individual, and we're going to have a beautiful conversation, and you all are beautiful for joining us. So thank you. And I also know that so many of you are joining us for the first time because Farah has a whole bunch of readers and followers and students and friends and fam that are going to come out to our yard. So welcome, and I want to entice you to come back to the Power Hour because, as I said at the outset, we are here at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific every single weeknight for you. But before I do that I do have some thank yous to share. First and foremost, on Friday night, we were entertained and inspired by Wesley Stace and the Late Style Band came out and did a benefit concert for our center. As many of you know, we lost our space during the pandemic. We're looking to find a new home. It's hard to be a safe space without a safe space, y'all, without a space, right? So Wesley came out with a whole band and put on an incredible show. And it was a benefit concert, and we all benefited just by being together. So thank you to Wes, thank you to the band, and thank you to all the folks in our community who joined us on Friday night. And then Saturday, we were further inspired. We have these wonderful young folks. I want to call them kids, but that's disparaging to them, I think, and I would also make me sound really old. But they're incredible. They're our Princeton University Fall Fellows, and they're doing incredible work. And we spent an entire day on Saturday doing that good work with our community outreach coordinator, Carol Watchler. And I just want to say that the work they're doing is extraordinary. Anna is creating a community cookbook because culture and family are so intertwined with being together in the kitchen, and that's how a lot of us connect. Alan is doing an incredible job of connecting gay-straight alliances across the state of New Jersey, and then hopefully making that a national platform. And Jade is looking to help alleviate the absolute imperative problem of LGBTQI youth homelessness. So thank you to our Fall Fellows for coming out and spending an entire day with us and doing some extraordinary work. And I'd say that even if one of them wasn't in our comments section tonight, helping us doing the do of connecting us to our guest tonight, connecting us to a link to buy her book, connecting us to further follow the adventures of the Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice. So thank you to them, thank you to you. And finally, as I promised you, that we're going to try to entice you back to the show as well. So if you give me a hot minute to share some folks that are coming up on the Power Hour, I think it's worth our time. And I think it's worth your time to come back and visit us again. So first and foremost, you can't be serious. You can't be serious. Cal Penn. Now, I've been sitting on this. I just started to announce it last week, and I apologize to our community. I haven't shared it. I've known about this for months and had to sit on it. It was our first true embargo here on the Power Hour. We couldn't tell you about it until Cal came out, and he came out and shared with us who he is, who he loves, that he's a member of our community, and we're so thrilled to welcome him to our community and to our Power Hour. So stay tuned, true believers. Cal Penn coming up on the Power Hour. It's going to be a good one. And further, we have Call and Response, the story of Black Lives Matter. Veronica Chambers, you know her, you love her, you read her in the Times, now see her on the Power Hour. We're doing Throwback Thursdays. As I said, we've done 450 shows thus far, and many of them, all of them, incredibly meaningful and inspirational. So we're bringing back on Thursdays some great moments that we've had. This moment we shared with Walter Nagel, who you know is the beloved partner of Bayard Rustin, and Senator Scott Wiener, who was the one person who spearheaded the effort to get Bayard pardoned for his quote unquote crimes of sodomy in the 50s. And Senator Wiener did that, and Governor Gavin Newsom not only pardoned Bayard, but pardoned everybody who was arrested under that horrible law. So we put these two together. They met here in the Power Hour. We're going to throw back this one on Thursday to celebrate that it is coming up on the anniversary of Bayard receiving, posthumously of course, the Medal of Freedom from President Obama. And we will have a moment with another guest of ours, the incredible Valerie Jarrett, who shared with us her memories of that day. So that'll be a pretty special episode, everybody. And then The Shattering Kevin Boyle, this great new book, is a wonderful lens of the civil rights movement in that time period. Samson McCormick, great Black queer comedian, controversial as all heck, and I cannot wait to chop it up with him. One of my favorites, Adam Gopnik, one of the finest minds of our generation. You read him in the New Yorker. 1,000 Small Sanities is an incredible book. He is OG radical of the real. Bloody Crossroads, we just booked this. Danny Goldberg, a music manager extraordinaire, everyone from Led Zeppelin to Nirvana, and our own Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice and Musician Residents, Jill Sobule. This great new book talks about arts, entertainment, and the resistance to Trump. And then finally, every Tuesday, please take a breath with us, both literally and figuratively. We have our queer yoga master, Jasmani, bring us to virtual nirvana. And that's just some highlights, my friends, just some highlights of what's coming up here in the Power Hour. But coming up right now, Farah Jasmine Griffin's new book, Read Until You Understand the Profound Wisdom of Black Life and Literature, allows us all the extraordinary opportunity to read along as a brilliant scholar imparts the lessons bequeathed by the Black community and its remarkable artists and thinkers. Taking to her heart the phrase, read until you understand, a line her father, who died when she was 9, wrote in a note to her. Farah made this beautiful concept central to this book about love of the majestic power of words and love of the magnificent of Black life. She has spent years rooted in the culture of Black genius and the legacy of books that her father left her. A beloved professor, Farah has devoted herself to passing these works and their wisdom onto generations of students. Now in this powerful and beautiful new book, I cannot stress it enough, she shares a lifetime of discoveries, the ideas that inspired the stunning oratory of Frederick Douglass and Malcolm X, the soulful music of Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder, the daring literature of Phyllis Wheatley and Toni Morrison, the inventive artistry of Romare Bearden, among many, many more. Farah entwines memoir, history, and art while she keeps her finger on the pulse of the present, asking us to grapple with the continuing struggle for Black freedom and the ongoing project that is American democracy. She challenges us to reckon with our commitment to all the nation's inhabitants and our responsibilities to all humanity. Well, here at the Power Hour, here at the Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice, we always dig a challenge and are always up for a reckoning. So please, without further ado, join me in welcoming to our Social Justice Power Hour, Farah Jasmine Griffin, author, scholar, and all-around inspirational individual. Farah, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be on this exciting show and to have the opportunity to talk with you.
We, when I read this book, when I saw this book, I'll be honest, I read a piece in the New York Times, which I implore everyone to go back to because it was such a beautifully written piece about the book. I was so inspired by your work. I was so inspired by the idea. I thought, what a brilliant concept. But I have to be totally upfront and crystal that it was really the piece that dealt with your father that touched me the most. So if we could start there, if that's okay with you, and talk about him and what he imparted upon you, because I think those relationships are so important and what molds us into our writing, into our activism, into the way we live our lives.
Absolutely. You know, my relationship to these books, you know, in some ways is so informed by my relationship with my father. I grew up in South Philadelphia. My father was a working class man who loved to read, loved history, spent a lot of time teaching me. He's my first teacher. He taught me how to read. He taught me how to write. He taught me how to read music. He taught me so many things. And we lived in Philadelphia, which is a historic city, you know, very important in the nation's history. So he took me to all of those places that were important, in, you know, Independence Mall, and taught me about the Declaration of Independence, and also taught me about African American freedom fighters, from Frederick Douglass to the Black Panthers, who he loved. And this would have been the late 60s, early 70s. And then one night came home from work on a Friday night. He worked at the Sunship Building Company as a welder. He came home, he went out to pick up some crab cakes for our dinner, and was brought home by a friend who said he wasn't feeling well and he wanted to come home. And my mother was very concerned because he had suffered a stroke a few years before. So we had a neighbor call. At that time, I don't even think 911 was in practice yet, but the police came, which was odd because in our neighborhood you didn't willingly call the police, but they came. And at that time, my father was kind of having a seizure or something, obviously in great distress. But the officer said that he was drunk. It was Friday night and he was drunk, and he was not drunk. And I always think even if he were, he was in distress. But so they waited and waited and waited. And finally, after my mother pleaded with them, they agreed to put him in a stretcher and take him to the hospital. The stretcher was not, maybe because it wasn't an ambulance, it was a police wagon, but it wasn't strapped down. And so as we turned those corners, it would slide back and forth and he would hit his head. And finally, we got him to the hospital and found out that he'd had a cerebral hemorrhage. And he died. I never saw him again after that Friday night. The last time I saw him, they were rushing the stretcher down the halls, the corridors of the hospital. I was 9 years old, and I was in a state of disbelief about my father leaving me without telling me. But he left a house full of books, and he'd shared with me a passion for reading. And I just thought if I worked my way through those books and I worked my way through his albums, he was a big jazz fan. If I worked my way through those books and albums, I could get some glimpse of my father. It was a way of staying close to him, but it became a lifetime passion that he, in those short 9 years, had bequeathed to me.
So, first of all, thank you for sharing that. However many times you tell that story, it must be very difficult. So I appreciate you trusting us and allowing us in like that. So this book is really kind of the apex of a life's journey. This is something that and you were 9 when this happened.
Yes.
It's extraordinary to me hearing you speak about the first part. How vivid even just you speaking about it allows us to see. And you were 9, and there are not few things I can remember from when I was 9. Was it shortly thereafter his passing that you realized, I have to hold on to these things. I have to make sure not only the physical objects, the books and the art and whatever else what was left in the house and the albums, so on and so forth, but the memories and the feelings. Did you make it a dedicated mission of yours to hold on to that as tightly as possible?
Absolutely. That's such a wonderful question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that question before. But yes, I did. I felt like I had to hold on to it. And I would write down, I'd write it down in my little diary. And my mother and I talked about it a lot. Whenever I wanted to talk about it, she would talk about it with me. And even as far as, graduate school, when I felt like I was losing some of those memories, I remember waking up in the middle of the night and writing down every single thing I could remember because I didn't want to forget. But I do also think that when traumatic things happen, we have different ways of responding to trauma. And sometimes we forget them, which is a gift in some ways that we can forget them. And other times our minds kind of obsess and repeat them. And I think for me, that night was a repeating for me. It wasn't the protective forgetfulness. I never had that.
Forgive me. This is so impactful for me personally, and I seldom get personal on the show. I try to keep it professional, and I try to keep it about the guest as well. I want to amplify, but this is meaningful to me because my dad is so important to me. And he comes to every one of our events. He was there Friday night at the concert, and sharing stories with Wes, the musician, and and I can see how proud he is of me and what we've accomplished. And I always think back to sitting on the couch in high school, and we'd spend hours editing a school paper that was, 2 pages and meant absolutely nothing in the scheme of things. But we spent that time, and he made me the writer that I am, and we played Scrabble, and it wasn't until college that I could beat him. And that was such a momentous occasion, and I could go on, but I feel this. And what you do with this book is you allow all of us that have those connections, or maybe even more importantly, those of us that don't have those connections to our fathers, to our mothers, to our parents, this window and this opening to this relationship that was so extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's true. We all have different kinds of relationships to our fathers. I have always been so moved by hearing like the story you just told, hearing stories about relationships with fathers that were close and influential and supportive and loving. And I just feel like we don't actually get enough of those kinds of stories. We get stories of distant fathers, but fathers who were there, who sat on the couch with you, and for me, who taught me the scales, the musical scales on one of those little toy xylophones. And until today, that's how I remember how to read music. I have that image in my head. And so I hope that in addition to many things I want this book to prompt, I hope that it will prompt those kinds of appreciations like the one you just shared.
So you've written quite a few books before this one. What was it about this moment that you thought, now it's time for this? Because this has obviously been sitting with you
forever,
right? Both literally and figuratively. Like you have all the ephemera and all the physical objects and the albums and the art and the books and so on and so forth. But you also have the memories that you've been writing down and keeping sacrosanct and sacred and in a place of remembrance. So if I may ask, what about this moment either inspired you or allowed you or thought this is the time for this?
Yeah. So I think that in some ways it kept creeping into my work anyway. It would find its way either in the subjects that I chose to write about or the concerns. It would find its way. But there were a few things both personally and politically that happened. It was a kind of convergence of the personal and the political. And personally, it was just being at this stage in my life and my career. I'm a writer, and it's, there are these things in the crevices of your mind as a writer that you've got to write about. You just have to write about them. And so I always knew that at some point I wanted to write about my dad. And I was thinking, if not now, when? Like, if I don't do it now, when? How many more books do I have in me? And if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? So that was part of it. And then writing about it in the way that I did was really a kind of response to the political moment that we found ourselves in. So when I heard, for instance, about what happened to Freddie Gray in Baltimore in the ambulance when they turned those corners, and even though Freddie Gray was not my father was not Freddie Gray, I'm perfectly aware of that. Um, just that ride, that sort of carelessness about being in the ambulance and how the stretcher moved around immediately made me think about my father. Um, and then as we came into the election, the 2016 election, I just was stunned. I think, like most of us, were stunned as I watched it unfold. And I just felt like so much of what we were thinking was new and different, um, the seeds of it had actually always been there, and that I'd seen it and witnessed it in my own life. And I certainly had witnessed it in the literature that I'd been reading and teaching all of these years. And what doing that had done for me is it gave me a more political sensibility that, yes, there are things that happen to me as an individual, but those things are part of much larger, deeper histories and systems, and individuals had been struggling against them long before I became aware of them. And so all of that kind of came together like a perfect storm. Like, let me tell these stories, let me figure out a way to tell this story in such a way that it speaks to our moment and our time.
So here's what's fascinating to me is having you share that piece about Freddie Gray and that connection, which absolutely brings that trauma back very, very justifiably, if I may say. Many of us, I think the vast majority of us, would turn to anger, if not rage, at hearing this story and saying, this happened decades ago, and there's been no evolution, there's been no change, there's been no movement, there's been no forward motion. There's nothing new here. It's all the same. It's Black lives, it's people of color, it's our Black and brown friends who are disrespected and treated entirely different, and just traumatized by a system that refuses to acknowledge their lives, literally. So how did you turn, because this book is a beautiful thing. This book is a celebration. So how did you find that strength, that incredible openness of spirit, instead of turning to rage, to turn to celebration?
So, I don't think it was so much instead of turning to rage. It was because I'm enraged all the time, right? So the rage, I think, is a legitimate emotion. I feel it every time something like, Freddie Gray, or, I finished this book and it was Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd. I mean, I'm enraged when that happens. So it's not instead of rage. It's like, yes, rage. And then, now what? Now what? What do you do now with that rage? Like, what do you do with it? Do you let it eat you up? Do you let it destroy you? What do you do? So then I started thinking about things that people do, and what our organizers were doing, and how brilliant and creative, and how they're always laying the groundwork for the moment when finally, people get enraged. And what our writers do, the people that I've been reading and studying. And I thought, okay, what I do with that rage is I write through it. And as I wrote through it, there were all these moments where I was like, you know what? What I remember even more than how devastating that was, is I remember the love. I remember how we were embraced. My mother and I were embraced by our family, by our neighbors, by people who had less than we had, but who embraced us. And so I feel the rage, and I remember the confusion and the anger and the devastation, but I also remember what it felt like to be so deeply loved by a community that didn't even question, like, oh, what did he do? Or maybe he was drunk, or, what, didn't even quit. Like, a community who knew from the beginning that we were not in the wrong, and that a wrong had been done to us, and that even if it wasn't going to be acknowledged by the people who did it, it was going to be acknowledged by them, and the way they addressed it was they loved us through it. So I felt like in order for the book to be true to that moment, it had to talk about the devastation, it had to talk about the trauma, it had to acknowledge the rage, but it also had to acknowledge beauty and the love that held us up so that we'd be ready to fight for another day. That's why.
To be back into the beautiful struggle, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So if I'm not mistaken, what I'm hearing is that this book evolved in the writing of it. That it started as one thing, and then you were taken with the pieces that you were putting together, and almost as if the jigsaw puzzle that you were putting together showed you an entirely different image than what you expected.
Oh yeah. So when I first proposed this book, initially I thought, I didn't even know I was going to put my father in there, right? Even though he's always there. So when I first proposed this book, I thought, oh my God, these people don't give a damn about democracy. They claim they care about democracy, but they don't. They'll let it all go. They'll blow it all up. Like they could care less. And that those of us who've had our, who've had boots on our neck, basically, are the ones who've been most invested in this experiment, this abstract thing, and that it's always been the marginalized people who've been like, hey, you're supposed to be about this set of ideals and you're not about it. And so I thought that this book was going to be about how that literary tradition and musical tradition, how it addressed those issues of democracy. That's what I thought. And then I realized, yeah, it does, but that's not all. That would be so narrow. That would be so narrow, and that this art, this music, this literature, it addresses being human. And democracy is part of it, but it's not all of it. It addresses what are our responsibilities to each other as human beings, and that transcends the United States. That transcends 1619. It transcends 1776, and it will be important no matter what happens here. I hope we win, right? But those ideals about love and how we treat each other as human beings, that's going to matter in the next world that we build to. So that's one of the ways it began to evolve. And when I thought about how have you learned how to think like this, I wanted to credit my teachers who taught me how to read all through, school. And then I was like, but my first teacher, my dad. So there's a place for him in this book. So that's how it sort of evolved.
And you mentioned teachers, so there's one more piece of a personal aspect of your journey that I want to talk about. Then let's really chop it up about the book. But you're a professor, and first and foremost, I would love to audit one of your classes. I would love to be there. I cannot imagine the sphere of not only incredible culture that you create in your classrooms, but the care as well. And that's such a rarity to have those two things intertwined. But do you see yourself as a professor, as a teacher, following in the footsteps of what your dad did for you?
Yes, absolutely. So I think, for me, my father's teaching me was an act of love. It made me believe teaching is an act of love. And that he provided a space where it was fun and it was interesting and where I felt invested in. And I think I try to do that with my students. And I try to get my students to see you're not competing with the person sitting next to you. Your goal is not to come out to be like the person sitting next to you and think like them. I don't want that. They already think like that. And it certainly isn't to be like me. I want you to be better than me, smarter than me. So your goal is to think about who you are at the beginning of the semester and who you will be at the end. And what will you have learned and what will you have acquired that you might want to share. And I think that's what my father did. I think my father was a frustrated teacher. And he taught every child who came within his path how to read, how to write their names, And you felt such sort of pride in being able to do that. You'd acquired something. And I hope my students feel that way too.
I can say unequivocally without any hesitation that because I feel that way right now, and we've been talking for half an hour, so I there's no way it's extraordinary. This is what a way to start our week on the Power Hour, and thank you. I always thought that teaching, I love what you said, that teaching it's a sacrosanct act. It's something that is not only about imparting wisdom, but it's imparting self-worth and identity. And everything you just said was all about, I was a public school teacher for 23 years. I taught middle school art, and I won't put myself in your league, but my concept was the same, is that every kid that came in my class, they needed to feel like they were seen and that they were recognized for whatever talent or lack thereof they had, but whoever they were presenting as, that's who they needed to be, who needed a light shined upon them.
Yep, I agree. I absolutely agree. I think about my art teachers. I have no talent whatsoever. I can't draw a straight line. But I loved my art classes and my art teachers because my art teachers taught me how to see. They taught me to see differently. Like without them, I might not notice that, I was saying I love autumn. So I see a field of red trees and suddenly there's a golden leaf. And I think I had this impulse, what would it be like to watercolor that? What would it be like to try to get that color? I have an appreciation and a love for visual art that I got from trying to learn how to be an artist, So I think there's so much that we get from our teachers in terms of what our own capacity and our own gifts are.
And you do that now, so it's that gift of vision that is a common thread.
Yeah.
That any teacher that should be their first and foremost piece they're trying to impart. So that's simpatico. The other piece of it is that everything we've talked about now, there's a thread you see of evolution. Mm-hmm. Almost everything that you've spoken about or upon today and through your work, there's evolution. And is that something that you are focused on, or is that just kind of implicit in what you do? So I guess the question is, let me rephrase to make it as crystal as possible. Is the idea of evolution to you an explicit concept that you work toward, or is it implicit in what you do just because of the character of who you are?
That's interesting. I think they're related. I think that there are things that were imparted to me by my father. Like he would give me a I'd see a book, for instance, and I'd really want the book because of the cover. Like I'd be like, this is a great, pretty lady on this cover, and I'd like to have this book because she looks like a model, And he'd say, okay, I'll buy you that book, but why do you want it? And I'd say, well, there's a pretty lady on the cover, and oh, there's some poetry in it. So he'd say, okay, well, I want you to memorize one of those poems and recite it for me at the end of the week or something. So there was that sense that, okay, I'm going to do something and I'm going to grow. I'm going to learn something. I'm going to be able to do this thing, even if it's just performative. So I think that it's there. But I think that it becomes something you do unconsciously. But I think that it's also very purposeful. One of my favorite, I think it might be an Amiri Baraka book. I think it's The System of Dante's Hell, where he writes an epigraph and he says, he who writes this book shall never read it. And on the one hand, that could be like, I'm not reading a book I wrote, like I'm done. Or the way I've always taken it is, by the time I finish writing it, I'm a different person. So the person who reads it is not the same person who started writing it, because there's a kind of evolution, to use that word, transformation in the process of writing it. And I think that's also true in the process of being politically engaged. There's a transformation and an evolution that happens in the process.
Wonderful. So let's talk about the book, and let me show it to our audience. This is the book that we've been talking around for a bit of time now. Read Until You Understand the Profound Wisdom of Black Life and Literature by our extraordinary guest tonight, Farah Jasmine Griffin. There is a link in the comments section to our bookshop.org list. We love bookshop.org because it gives back to independent bookstores. And when you put in your zip code to ship your book, it finds the most local independent bookstore in your area and will give part of your purchase to them. Goes back to Farah some and just a little tiny bit to the center. So we all the way around it's a win-win-win. So if you use that bookshop.org link, and you can do it while we're talking, and you don't have to leave this wonderful conversation. And actually, if I may say, all the other inspirational authors that have been on the Power Hour are there too. So there's an incredible array of wonderful books. But this is the first one you should buy, and then if you have extra money, buy the others. But this is the one you want to focus on tonight. So let's talk about the book. In the book, you raise up and you amplify all these different artists and authors and cultural figures. I want to talk about some specifically, but first a more general question of, out of all of the folks that obviously you have within you, that have inspired you, that have allowed you to evolve, to grow, to learn, to see things differently, to vision, to dream, did you make a list and then wheedle it down, or was it did names come to you and say, no, these are the folks I want to write about?
So one of them was there from the beginning. I knew she was going to be there. She was going to be in every chapter. She was the most important one, and that was Toni Morrison. So there was no question whether or not Morrison was going to be there. She was going to be there. And then there were others that came and went, actually. So I had a list. I knew that there were certain people. I knew Richard Wright would be there. I knew Langston Hughes would be there. I knew Toni K. Bombara would be there. But there are others, I knew James Baldwin. So there were a few people that I knew. But there are others who weave in and out who came as I was writing, and who were important to me. There's so many that are important to me that aren't there. But I didn't know how they would fit in, so especially some of the 19th century ones. The chapter on rage and resistance focuses on the 19th century people. And when I first thought about that, I had no idea that they were going to be there. But they just, I wrote the chapter with other writers, actually. But then those 19th century people, they came back and they were just like, wait a minute, we were dealing with this. Your readers need to know. And so I went back and I pulled them out. So some of them were always there, and others of them asked to be there as I was writing.
So it sounds as though you were visited by ghosts as you were writing this. You were
lots of ghosts,
lots of spirits who came to you and said, hey, don't forget about me. This is what I did.
Exactly. And you know about me. How can you say that I wasn't important to you? I was important to you at some point in your life. So yeah. So then there's a definite balance between those that were important to you personally, emotionally, spiritually, and then there was those who were important to the community in the same respect. So how did you find that balance as well? How did you say, okay, these are the folks that I want for me, right? And these are the folks that I want for the community. Yeah. I almost always not erred, but I chose the side of the people, the ones who were going to be important for the community and the ones who were going to be important for the readers, and every once in a while I'd sneak in someone who was just really important to me, and I might introduce you and you would fall in love with them too, which is how Rita Dove ends up jumping in the last chapter. But for the most part, I knew that these were people who were beloved of a certain set of readers. So for instance, Du Bois is not there, although he's very, very important to me. And he could be in any one of those chapters. He makes a brief appearance, but Frederick Douglass is there, and Malcolm is there, So for the most part, I tried to choose writers who I knew were of major importance to the community about whom I was writing. And occasionally, I also wanted to maybe introduce some or reintroduce some who were less well known.
What I really dig about it is that you allow the reader to see the master strokes of these writers, of these speakers, of these artists, above and beyond their cultural significance, how important they were to the community, that is almost on the side, and it's all about how they were able to use language, and whether that was, written word, spoken, or visual. So how did you find that? I love the process of it. So was there a moment where you said, I have to make sure that I am celebrating this aspect of the work? Because everyone, what was there? Did you feel as though there was an understanding of the import of these folks, so you didn't have to stress that as much as how they imparted their wisdom?
Right. So yeah, I never once say, "Oh, this is, the most important person." And what I wanted to do, I wanted you to have just a little, like in this book, I wanted you to have a little bit of each of them in it, what they did with language. And I'm not like, I wanted to say, don't believe me, right? Here it is. You decide for yourself. Look at what they're able to do with 3 sentences. Look at what they're able to move forward with this image. And so I wanted the book to be both a way of understanding it, but also little gems of the writing that are right there, that I wanted to invite readers to slow down, pandemic time, right? Slow down with me. Let's read this together, and it'll take your breath away, what they were able to do. So it wasn't so much the necessity of arguing that these were important figures. I was like, for me and for you, that's a given. They're important. This is why they're important. This is what they have. This is the gift that they bequeathed us.
You just put language to something that I was trying to wrap my head around, and how to express. There's an economy to this book that's extraordinary, because you are taking huge concepts and huge folks and a huge platform and saying, okay, I'm going to chop this up. I'm gonna parse this. And you economize, which is such a rarity in so much, and something that I myself am wholly unsuccessful. Shakespeare would be very disappointed. Brevity is not the soul of my wit. But you do that in this book. You what you just said, I want to pick this out. You said, in these 3 sentences, look what they accomplish. In this stroke of a brush, look what they communicate. Right. Was that also something that you set out to do? Was that at the outset?
Yeah. So I for instance, we'll take the chapter on death, for instance, and of contemporary writers, because we were living in a moment of such intense death. When I finished that chapter, it was the pandemic. We'd already been through many of the police killings. And I thought, one of the people who writes most eloquently about death is Jesmyn Ward. And she's writing in this moment, right, for us. And if I could, what I really am saying is, go read Jesmyn Ward, read all of her books, right? But let me just give you a taste of how she moves us through experiencing the consistent death of the people we love, people who should not be dead, the injustice of their deaths. And partly it's because she makes us appreciate their lives and their full-bodied beingness while they're alive, so that we're devastated by their loss. And here's a way she does that. Here's one way she does it. Look here, just at this closing paragraph, how she does it. And so, yes, I picked people based on, it's not that those other writers didn't write about death, because they do, but I thought, oh, she writes about it most exquisitely. Or this one writes about injustice most exquisitely. Or this one writes about mercy. They all do, but some of them are especially good at those particular topics.
Look, I'm coming up over here. There you are.
Mhm.
Look, we're having a little.
There you are.
There you are. Sorry about that. I always promise two things in the show: inspiration and technical difficulties. So, welcome to
They
both.
go together.
So, I'm all thrown off now. I'm in this side, so I'm not used to being on this side. So forgive me. I can't ask any questions now. I've lost all my strength. So it's this economy of finding those bits and pieces that you can impart as much as possible in them. But there's also this looking to the open spaces as well between the artists and the writers and the speakers. How did you contend with that? There's also a timeline involved, right?
Hmm. Yeah. So it's not chronological, So the first chapter um, includes people. It includes a person from the 18th century, a person from the 19th, early 20th century, and a person who's writing that particular book is a 21st century book. And I wanted to put them together. And in each chapter, I try to go through time in that way, but putting people together to show this concern has been a concern over time. And this is how, over time, these writers have dealt with this value or this concern or this ethical question. And that one of them is dealing with it at the very beginning of the nation, right? And that's informing, and her understanding is informed by a certain kind of Christianity. And by the time we get to the end, the other one is dealing with it in the same nation, centuries later, just as it's electing its first Black president, right? And so that's going to inform how she thinks about this concept. So I wanted readers to be able to move through time to see what's consistent through time, but what's also different, what's very different as well. And you can see that by putting them close together in that way.
I think it was such a great concept because it doesn't force us to say, okay, this is linear.
Right.
These experiences are sometimes decades, sometimes centuries apart, but they're so incredibly similar. And then it brings us back to the idea of your father and Freddie Gray and all these experiences that are, years or decades or centuries apart, but are so incredibly intertwined or similar, or there's a spirit or an energy or a piece of it that definitely speaks onto the other.
Absolutely. And also, I think one of the things that was very important for me to show was some of these things are things that people within working poor, working class Black communities have dealt with every day, every single day. And we as a nation and as a world become aware of it in 2012, 2014, 2016, right? We become aware of it because there's camera footage or because suddenly we care. Maybe we care a little more. But the folk who've been living it, when they see it happen, they're like, that's been happening. Like that's been happening. And what has changed is our response to it, our expectation that there will be some response. That's what's changed, not the fact that it happened.
And the fact that so many more folks are now open to it, and that brings back the question of how is one not enraged when, you see all these folks saying, oh my gosh, I cannot believe the injustice. I cannot believe the disparity. I cannot believe the inequality that we're seeing. And you're saying, yeah, that's been my life.
Exactly.
Don't tell me, I'm glad you're a little late to the party, right?
Yeah, my thing is like, you're a little late, but welcome. Glad to have you here. We need you. Thank you for being here. But yeah, that's been our lives. And that maybe there's something in the people who have lived it. Maybe they have something to teach you about how to confront it and about what it is and what it means. It's worth listening to them. They've been thinking about it for a long time.
And that's that openness that just pervades this book that makes it such as, that makes it even more extraordinary than all the rest of what we've been talking about. There's another piece of it that really interests me is, how did you not get stuck in the moment? As you're writing this, so much of it, all of it really, communicates exactly what we are dealing with, suffering through, trying to persevere over. But the book doesn't get stuck in it. It always, there are moments when you feel it, but there's always a rising above. And what's amazing about that is the rising above usually is in the form of something historical.
Yeah.
Right?
No, so I'm glad you noticed that. I could have very well gotten stuck in the moment because the moment was so intense, right? But I think I wanted to be of importance beyond that moment. And the person in me who is historically informed knows that there is a beyond, right? So one of the reasons, for instance, I say I started writing this book during the 2016 presidential election. And so much of it addresses all the mess that happened as a result of that. But I don't put that president's name in my book. I didn't want his name in my book. Because I felt that it really wasn't just about him. It was about what put him in place and in power. And that he would one day be gone, maybe not as soon as I wanted him to be gone. And God knows he's not gone yet. But he would one day be gone as an individual. But that thing about our country that put him in a position of power, that thing had been there for a long time before him, and that thing is going to be there after him. And so I think that's why I didn't want to be just stuck in the moment, right? I wanted to realize that this has been a long struggle, a long fight, and that it will be an ongoing one, and it will be one that we can move our way through and beyond. But we have to confront this truth and this history. It's not just about him.
That language is fascinating to me, because for the longest time on the Power Hour, I always tried to avoid saying his name and invoking, not letting him be a part of what we were doing. And I've been pretty successful. I think that there have been slips, but I always thought that it was about just not wanting to give him any platform whatsoever, not wanting to amplify that name. But I wonder if in the back of my mind I was thinking, and maybe I'm just not as smart as you. I'm obviously not as smart as you, but this concept of it's not just him, right? So the book that you've written and Read Until You Understand can carry forth and represents not only that office, but that type of person who inhabits that office. So if we find ourselves in those dark moments again, it becomes that much more relevant.
Yeah, and it's also, that those are the forces we have to struggle with, right? The forces that would let that happen, that would allow that to happen. And I think that there were people who were stunned that happened, but there were those of us who always knew it could. It could. That's what we were fighting against. That's what we were struggling against. But we were struggling and fighting because we knew it was possible. The people who were surprised didn't think it was possible. So I think that's what I hope, is that we are fully aware that this is a thread in our history. It's a thrust, and just like but it's not the only one. That we, those of us here, who want a better world, that we have a tradition too. That we have a long lineage at our back that have helped push us forward as well. So, it's not a certain defeat when we're faced with that kind of evil.
There are two pieces I want to pull at right there. One is, and it's not only about the highest office in the land, it's when we look at police officers, on the streets, and we look at this judge right now in the Rittenhouse trial, which is a travesty and a tragedy all at once. And you look at folks like that are in power, large and small, in community and in the greater platforms
Right.
of our country, our culture, our world. So it's really a fascinating idea to not name, but just to give that authority the overall presence in the writing of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then the other piece I knew that we would go too quick. So much I wanted, and it's been nothing but a pleasure and so thought provoking, and emotionally resonant for me. I have to be honest. There's the idea of legacy
Hmm.
that white folks often talk about what they're losing. That this is our country, and make America great again, and all of those ideas, right? And when you talk about legacy and you talk about tradition, you're talking about the real of it, and we often talk about the workers behind the scenes,
Yep.
and the people who literally built the country, and every aspect of what we do, both historically and in present day. But then there's also the legacy of what you write about and amplify in this book, of there are so many traditions
So many.
and so many
So
voices that have put
many.
this country forward and put our culture forward. And you have done an incredible great service for all of us in raising up not only the names and not only the works, but what they have meant to you personally, and then allowing us into what that meant to you, and then what it means to all of us.
Yeah, I thank you. I mean, I think that's what I hope to do. I hope that people will go away feeling empowered, that they will go away wanting to read more, that they will go away noticing the small beauties all around us, because that's how we get through, you know, that even in the worst of it, there's something that is there that's just a moment of grace for us, a chance to breathe. I love the fact that you all are going to have the yoga, like that we have to breathe, to continue this. That, yeah, it's a beautiful struggle.
Beautiful struggle indeed. So my last question is this: how did you know how to end it? As you're writing this, there's so much, and
Yeah.
can we hope for more? Is there more? Will there be part two? Will there be an addendum to the paperback?
Yeah.
Was there stuff on the cutting room floor? It's like we were talking about being an art teacher, and knowing when to stop, knowing when to, all right, there's so much more I can do, but it's finished.
Yeah. So I think I always knew that it was going to end on grace. I knew that from the beginning. I didn't know what that meant really. But it's interesting. One day I was writing, and I knew that there were going to be, there's this whole thing about gardens. I knew that was going to be in there. But I was walking through the park, and this was in the thick of the pandemic when we were on lockdown. And I would walk through the park every day, and I was walking through the park, um, and suddenly I just sat down on a park bench and I took out my phone and I wrote what became the last two paragraphs. It just came to me. So suddenly, I knew where my book came to an end. I just had to figure out to make sure I got there. But I knew where it would come. And that part, that just felt very inspired. And it felt very in the moment because it was. And yes, there are things that I want to explore more. Like there won't be a sequel, there won't be a part two, there won't be like Maya Angelou's multiple autobiographies. But there are things that I thought about and discovered that I will return to and write about some more.
Well, we look very much forward to that. And I love the fact that even the ending in and of itself was part of the evolution.
Yeah.
Just brilliant, brilliant stuff, beautiful stuff. And grace. I love that. That's such a perfect way that you ended the book, and such a perfect way for us to unfortunately have to end this conversation. Grace, with grace. Thank you for this.
So much.
Our community is so thankful for your being with us in virtual communion tonight, and for this book. And you are always welcome back. And if there is a piece you want to share further, we are here for you and with you and would welcome the opportunity. This has been a beautiful, beautiful moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Be well. So that is our new friend, author, scholar, professor. Wonderful, wonderful moment here in the Power Hour. This is the book, Read Until You Understand the Profound Wisdom of Black Life and Literature, by our guest tonight, Farah Jasmine Griffin. There's a link at the comments section. Please go purchase a copy of this book. Buy one for yourself, buy one for a friend, buy one for an enemy, you'll become a friend. Make sure your local schools have a copy of this. And most importantly, we want you all to buy a copy, but we realize that not everybody can afford every book. So we also ask you to do this. Call your local library. Make sure they have a copy of this book on their shelves, because folks that can't afford to buy every book, their local library is a conduit for them to be introduced to ideas and beauty and legacy such as this. So please do that as well. Cannot thank Farah enough for her time, energy, and spirit shared tonight. Cannot thank all y'all enough for your time, energy, and spirit shared with us being here on the Power Hour. Please do come back to the Power Hour. We are here for you. Please be here with us. So until soon, my friends, much love and respect. Please, please be good to each other. Be good to your families, chosen or otherwise. And most especially, my friends, please be good to yourselves. You need it, and we need you here with us.
We need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers.